Hi everyone, welcome to the Empower Sounds podcast. My name is Mahika, and on today's episode, I'm joined by the amazing Vicky Booth, CEO of Inspiring Girls International. We're going to talk about all the challenges and opportunities young women face, from girls in school to people entering jobs to transitioning jobs to a whole host of topics. We're also going to talk about our reflections that we could tell our younger selves with the This Little Girl Is Me campaign. I hope that you learn. I hope that you laugh. I hope that you enjoy. Let me know what you think in the podcast Instagram at Empower Sounds. And let's get started. Awesome. Well, Vicky, welcome to the podcast. Can you please start by introducing yourself and telling us all about you and about Inspiring Girls?
Sure, yeah. So I'm Vicky Booth, and I'm the CEO of Inspiring Girls International. Thanks so much for having me on today. It's great. Uh, so I basically my role is to oversee the small secretariat that we've got here at Inspiring Girls, which is based in the UK. And we coordinate across currently 39 countries of teams that are all working towards the same goal, which is essentially to make sure that all girls everywhere have access to amazing women role models. And we know the sort of power of that in terms of increasing girls' aspirations and their ambitions for themselves. We work with girls between the ages of 11 to 16, usually. And it's just a really pivotal age in terms of getting women in front of them, who they can look up to and they can learn from, and who, frankly, widen their horizons and let them see what's possible.
That's amazing. And I'm sure people have an idea because they're listening to this podcast, but why is it so important for young women or young girls to have access to female role models, especially at a young age?
Yeah, well, I mean, because the picture is not a particularly happy one, I'm afraid. Even in now we're 2024, we're still seeing that the gender stereotypes that have kind of pervaded through lots and lots of different sectors, and lots of different areas of societies still very much exist. Um, we've had some big bounds forward, obviously, in terms of gender equality in lots of areas, but actually, if in terms of the women that these girls can see when they look around them, it can be really, really limited. And at that age, girls tend to they start opting out, I'm afraid. They start seeing jobs for the boys, jobs for the girls when they get to a certain age. And they will opt out. They will just say, well, that's not for me. And we're here to say, no, it very much is for you. These are and there's nothing quite like kind of somebody standing in front of you saying, well, actually, I'm not just telling you that you could do this job. I am doing this job, and I have a story to tell. Um, and it's really transformative and very powerful. We've still, I mean, the girls' attitude survey that the Girl Guides did last year. 1 in 5 girls in the UK alone still say that gender stereotypes hold them back in school. So we've still got a huge issue, still battling a big problem there. And unless we actually smash those stereotypes and get through to girls at that age before they start kind of looking at, options for even GCSEs and A levels, we need to get to them at that stage, to just plant that seed early enough.
Yes, 100%. And how do Inspiring Girls actually do that? So, from my research, you guys created an initial campaign which saw 24,000 volunteers sign up.
Mm.
And how did you do that? What do you actually do on the ground level with young girls?
Sure. So we are all about the connections between the girls and these women. So we were founded back in 2016 by Miriam Gonzalez Durantes, when she saw the problem essentially and thought that she's got to do something about this. Um, and the thousands, millions of these incredible women working in all the different sectors that we know there are women there, and yet they weren't visible. They weren't able, there was no connection between them and sort of the average 14-year-old girl in a school, 13-year-old girl in a school. So she saw this problem, thought she's got to do something about this. So set up an organization based in the it was actually a UK initiative at first, where those volunteers were recruited into. And then over years, we evolved into Inspiring Girls, and took the organization international. And I'm delighted to say, 2016 we started, and that it has now grown to 39 countries in that time. So, we sort of in 8 years, that's an incredible rate of growth. And I think just speaks to how much the work is needed. The way that our charity works is that we simply recruit in every country we work in. We have an open access model. So any woman anywhere can be a role model for us. Any woman anywhere can volunteer for Inspiring Girls, whether you're in Peru or Singapore or Morocco or Mexico. You can volunteer for Inspiring Girls in the same way, and the local team will then connect you in with a school. We usually work through schools to go in and do those talks or participate in events and have that impact on the next generation.
That's incredible. And I wanna, before I start talking to you about diversity, because you mentioned 39 countries, and I think with that comes not just in terms of on the global scale, but what girls want for themselves and their dreams are also so diverse. So before we talk about that, I want to discuss this idea of, you said it was open access, and young people are, I don't want to say vulnerable, but in the UK, definitely we have like DBS checks and all this stuff to make sure that
Mm.
like people are safe to work with children. So, how do you maintain open access and create opportunities for people to work with the girls while still maintaining kind of responsibility and standards and making sure that the girls are like being influenced by people that will benefit them?
Sure. Yeah. No, it's absolutely right. And obviously, as a charity, we take that incredibly seriously in terms of safeguarding responsibilities. So we're unlike other charities or organisations. We specifically don't do mentoring programs. So we don't put ourselves in a position where we're connecting adults with children. There are brilliant organisations out there that do that. Just got to shout out to the Girls Network in the UK, who I've done some work with myself, who do that brilliantly. But we specifically don't do that. And one of the reasons is, as you said, in order to scale in the way that we have, both nationally and internationally, we've only been able to do that by using the model that we've put in place, which is using schools as our main course, our main point of interaction. So whenever we do the work that we're doing, it's usually within the school environment, or with the school sometimes we do events where the school comes out to workplaces. It's becoming increasingly popular to bring a group of girls to workplaces to actually see where the work's being done. But it's always with a teacher and with responsible adults, and obviously with full permissions of the parents, etc. One of the things we also do with Inspiring Girls, which is why we say that our primary beneficiaries are the girls, clearly, but close behind, second beneficiaries are the women that volunteer with us. Because we do a lot of support and training and guidance for the women that work with us. So we will usually, before women, we've got lots of written materials, but also before women volunteer, we can talk them through the process. Some of these women that we work with, senior level women, are more comfortable in a boardroom than a classroom, I think it's fair to say. So we really talk them through it and help them and guide them through that process. But and when they've done it, I have heard so often women say to us, "Oh, I think I got as much out of that as the girls did." It's such a common thing to hear after any of these events, which is a lovely thing. It's a lovely thing. But no, certainly to your question, we take the safeguarding very seriously, clearly.
And that thank you for sharing that. And how did you manage to get your message out to 39 countries? How have you managed to scale it and get people to give up their time and
Mm.
get schools to collaborate with all these incredible women? What strategies have you used to grow, and what advice would you give to other activists, organizations that are trying to scale and create a global brand and reach as well?
Yeah, good question. Well, to be absolutely honest with you, the organization has grown largely organically. And I think that is one of our biggest strengths, actually. The way in which people find out about Inspiring Girls, we don't really do proactive headhunting. Occasionally, if there's a particular focus on a country, and maybe in our future years we may start to do that, but we have very rarely gone out and done proactive headhunting of country chairs. It's been very much word of mouth. The women that our country chairs are our heartbeat, right, of the organization. They are the women that keep the activity going on the ground. They are the women that sort of are talking about Inspiring Girls every day, wherever they may be, and that the word gets out. When people are passionate about what they do, and they've got purpose and they've got drive, people feel it and they hear it. And I think when you talk to the right person, or the right person, it lands on fertile ground. People tend to go, hang on a minute, I'd love to bring that to my country. They're often quite surprised in countries where we're not established. They're often quite surprised that it's not active there. They've gone to sort of say, well, God, I've heard about this initiative and I really want to volunteer there. Hang on a minute, there's no Inspiring Girls. We've one of our newest country teams, for example, is Croatia, and she couldn't believe there was no Inspiring Girls Croatia, and she wanted to lead it. And we've set up all of the structures in terms of advice to other organisations. I mean, we have worked very hard to set up a structure by which it maintains all of the due diligence and safeguarding that we have to be so aware of as a central charity. But also the kind of by listening very carefully and experiencing and having the experience of onboarding new country chairs, you learn a lot from that process. And as a result, we've come up with a set of resources and materials that mean that we can onboard new country chairs very quickly and provide them with a framework that means whilst they are leading the organisation in their country, and we're very clear about that, we give them a toolkit, if you like, to get them on the road.
That's incredible. And speaking of kind of incorporating new countries and missions, how do you create a diverse narrative in the kind of talks that are held in schools? Because, for example, I come from an Indian background, but growing up in the UK, there's very different ideas of what success look like, even for women, but just as
Mm,
an individual in terms of what you need to study, what the metrics are. And that's like drip fed into you from a very young age, depending on your
mm,
family, on your environment, on your culture.
mhm,
So how do you make sure that each kind of chapter in each country
mm.
is unique and tailored to the culture of the place and reflective of the society, while still kind of going above and beyond and continuing to diversify the narrative for women globally?
Yeah. Well, yeah, I mean, it's a challenge, it's an ongoing challenge, right? Like, ensuring that you've got a diversity of voices, a truly diverse representative sample of voices within your volunteer network is a constant, that's a constant challenge for us. Um, and if you imagine, we're not only grappling with kind of, people's backgrounds and where they may have come from, or where, their socioeconomic status, or we're not just grappling with that. We're also grappling with the diversity of sectors that we want to represent. So it's not just about kind of representing lawyers, or we're not just got people in the financial services industry. We need to make sure that we're also including the voices of artists, and we're also including the voices of creatives in other respects, and people at all levels of organizations, not just the CEOs, not just the kind of senior execs, but also people in their first jobs, interns, making sure that we've really got that breadth. So this is something that the country chairs spend a lot of time on. They spend a lot of time just making sure that that volunteer base is really genuinely diverse. And ultimately, I do believe that a lot of this comes down to the fact that at the base of our organization is storytelling, right? So we are here to facilitate the stories of the women that go into those schools. And I think when we brief people and when we give them guidance, we're really clear on that, because it's one thing to impart knowledge, or what you perceive to be knowledge, right? About what success looks like, exactly as you've just said. So it's, one thing to kind of go in and say, right, in order to succeed, these are my 3 top tips, 1, 2, 3, right? That might be part of somebody's talk. But some of the most insightful relatable parts of people's talks. It's just simply about where they've come from, where they've been, who they are, the challenges they've overcome. Sometimes that's professional, sometimes that's personal, but just weaving that into your talk is a really, really, like, that is one of the most important sort of things that we tell people. It's, yes, they want to hear about your job. Yes, absolutely pass on advice, but also make sure that you're telling it as a story. Make sure you're telling your story. And it's amazing how many people actually have never done that before.
Wow, 100%. And I can personally testify for the power of storytelling.
Mm.
I have definitely benefited from a lot of teachers in my school who were brave and told me their stories. And a lot of the things that I really pride myself in now of who I am and what I do is all because of one conversation or one story. So
Right.
I 100% agree with you. And I want to ask you to take this opportunity to tell us your story. So for the audience of the podcast, they're not in front of you right now, but can you please tell us the story of Vicky?
I'm going to probably do a not very good example now, having told you that this is all the advice that we give to people going into schools. Sure. Okay. So where shall I begin?
It's
I
your
began,
story.
it's my story. I can begin wherever I like. So I grew up without a particular focus about what I wanted to do in life. I wasn't particularly, I've got a family that's mainly public sector. So, mixture of mostly medical, but there's a mix in there. Um, and without any particular direction. But the one thing I do remember from a very early age is being driven by a need for my whatever I was doing to mean something to me and light me up. And I can really tell when I'm lit up by something. And because, I mean, like most people, my voice changes and I get very, I start waving my arms around and all of that. And I knew when I felt lit up, and I remember that vividly from a very early age. Um, I think my first memory of any kind of career direction was watching David Attenborough on a Sunday night do one of his like amazing programs. It's not a female role model, in fact. And I didn't want to be David Attenborough, I have to say. I have to just say that. But that he went out on a boat with this incredible woman who had like bright red hair and a bright dyed red hair and piercings everywhere. And I thought she was just the coolest thing I'd ever seen. And she was out on this boat and they were doing that. To be absolutely honest, I can't even remember what animal they were even looking at. But I just remember her saying, clear as a bell, I remember her saying that she was a marine biologist. And her job seemed to consist of just going out to these beautiful tropical places, out on boats and looking at animals. As far as I could tell, that was her job. And she was so lit up about her job. She was so enthused. I mean, she was, I just thought, oh, I'll be a marine biologist. I didn't, nothing to do with science, not nothing to do with liking science. I did like animals, but not, I wasn't obsessed. But I thought, oh, great, I'll be a marine biologist. Anyway, fast forward, I was not a marine biologist, but that kind of sense of like really wanting to um, be excited about what I did every day has really stayed with me. Um, I sort of went to university. No, actually, I had a gap year in Nepal, which really fundamentally changed. I was teaching out there, and that really fundamentally changed my worldview, I would say. Going out to somewhere like Nepal at 18 is quite there was a real culture shock, to be honest. Um, and really opened my eyes to some really some gender dynamics that I had just never been exposed to in, growing up. Um, and how that intersected with religion and lots of other, elements of Nepalese society. I was fascinated actually by it. So when I came back to when I came back to the UK and went to university, I was lucky enough to, and similarly to you, I was lucky enough to meet this absolutely incredible tutor who specialised in it was South Asian area studies actually, and I ended up working with her a lot during my university, and I was lit up by it. I was massively enthused. And as I went through university, and I also got more and more involved in campaigning, various campaigns, advocacy, sort of small p politics within university. I thought I wanted to go into international development work, but actually, and worked for a charity for a small amount of time, an international conflict resolution charity. But then found myself came out of I did a master's in gender studies. And again, very much thought I was on the track for looking for a career in international development. And then came across a job which I hadn't even considered looking at, with the Liberal Democrats, a UK political party. And it was working with an MP that I'd really looked at and admired, Jo Swinson, who then went on to be leader much, much later on. And she was running a campaign within the party to get more women into politics, more women into political office, so supporting MPs, potential MPs. And I applied for the job, and to my surprise, I got it. And that was the beginning of an 8-year political career, which was absolutely amazing and gave me tons of opportunities. I worked with some incredible people. I established something called the leadership program whilst I was there, which then, it working with women, men and women actually, but from underrepresented groups that were underrepresented within the political part, the parliamentary party at the time. And lots of those individuals have now gone on to be elected. And that is such it's an incredible thing for me. Like, I feel very quietly proud to have played a tiny part in their journeys. And I think that's something that I have always found is what really I love supporting people to succeed. And I love that sense of being there to basically to support others to be able to kind of reach their potential. That is something it's always been my role. And so when I came out of, I did that, and then continued in politics, but in a little bit less of a kind of, not within a political party, but I worked with Nick Clegg when he left government. And I worked with him we did advocacy, 3 years of advocacy, mainly around Brexit. Say it quietly. But yes, but because it was all around that time. Which again, fabulous experience. Quite a depressing time because we were battling forces that were much bigger than we were. But again, I think we played our part, and I'm so glad that we did play a role in that period of time, speaking out against what we felt was a huge mistake. So, and then just to fast forward on, I then Miriam was at that point moving over to the US, and she needed somebody to really take the reins at Inspiring Girls, because it was clear that Inspiring Girls was absolutely was accelerating at a rate of knots at that point. And the point I took over, it was with 7 countries, but there were so many more that were interested, and it clearly we needed to accelerate things. And so I stepped into the role, and here we are, 6 years later. 6 years later. Yeah.
Wow. What I find really interesting about your story is that although you started out with this idea of being a marine biologist, there's a lot of themes that have kind of continued throughout the story. Your kind of values of wanting to make a difference, doing work that excites you, supporting people. And those are still very, very, very big themes of the work that you do today, even though it's entirely different from
Yeah.
what you set out to do. And
Mm.
so I want to touch on that because I think often we're told to set goals, and it's something that's really, it's seen as beneficial, it's seen as important. But how do we leave room in our goals for life to surprise us and to push us forward in a way that maybe we wouldn't have planned, but is ultimately taking us to where we need to go?
I think I'm a career opportunist. I would definitely put myself in that basket. I had very little strategic. I don't think I haven't really had a huge amount of strategic direction. But what I have had is a lot of instinct. And instinctively, as exactly as you say, that whole idea that something excites me is really important to me. And therefore, actually, if something excites me, I usually just go for it. And I'm very lucky that that has actually worked. That has worked out for me, and I've had the most amazing opportunities. I do think, and I do say this to girls when I'm talking to them, and if they're asking me questions about in that area, I do say there are certain. I think having that attitude and having that approach is definitely um, is one thing. You've got to really boss whatever you're doing, right? Like whatever you're doing, do it to the very best of your ability, and you will find that opportunities are created as a result. You might, and you really will not know necessarily what those opportunities are. Exactly as you've said, I think there are incredible people, and I've heard them tell stories of people setting themselves these goals and going, right, that's where I'm going and I'm going to get there no matter what. And they graft and they work and they talk to whoever they can and they get there. And that's like incredible. It's not been my story, right? That my story is born of like, I'm excited about this. I love what I'm doing. I'm going to do it to the very best of my ability. And out of it has grown. I'm lucky enough that an opportunity has grown as a result of it. And also, working places like politics. God, I mean, you have to like swim in the slipstream, right? It's constant change. It's like work. We used to say it's like working in quicksand. Your ground is changing underneath you on an almost daily, if daily, weekly basis. Elections get called unexpectedly. The fortunes of parties, and don't I know it, they rise and fall on the wind. It's really it's fickle, but what comes with that, if you can ride that out, if you're comfortable with that change, if you're really comfortable with change, what comes of that is a lot of opportunity as well.
100%. And you mentioned there's the type of person that has a goal and then really like mission, vision, strategy, and
Yeah.
they get there. And there's a lot of people I know in my life that when they were young, they were like, I'm going to be a doctor, and then are in medical
Right.
school,
Yeah.
or they're there. But I know there's a lot of people as well that I grew up with that had no idea what they wanted to do.
Mm.
I'm in university still, and I'm going into my final year, and I know a lot of the people around me are feeling kind of a bit lost because
Mm.
they have kind of a bit of a mix of interests and skills, but they have no idea what to do with it. And there's this anxiety. So, what would you say to young women and girls that are listening that don't have the dream yet and
Mm.
feel a little bit anxious about not having a dream or a goal to work towards? What steps
Mm.
would you tell them to take?
It's really tricky. I mean, that stage in life. I mean, I remember it quite well, actually. Weirdly, it was a long time ago now, but I remember it well. And I've also just recently finished mentoring somebody who is at that point in their lives. You feel like you're about to walk off a cliff. Like it's a scary time. People are telling you that you need experience in order to get jobs, but you can't get the experience before you get the job. And it's tough. Um, and again, it comes down to and can the people that can afford to do internships versus the people that can't, and like the opportunities that they have that's afforded, and all of that in the mix. I would say to people just when I got my first job in the charity, the conflict resolution charity, I was being paid peanuts, barely covered my living expenses. But I stuck it out, and I think I would just come back to it. I think wherever you find yourself, like wherever that might be, it may not be that you're in a sector that you want to be in for the rest of your life. Definitely not a role. I definitely didn't want to do that role for the rest of my life. I was sort of administrating a course. It was a brilliant organization, by the way, absolutely incredible, doing amazing work in conflict resolution all around the world. But my job was really pretty dry. Um, but I did it to the best of my ability, right? Like I did it well, and I suggested changes, and I was ambitious for it, and I talked to a lot of people. And I think even when you're young, this is harder, but just doing that whole thing that I know it's recommended, but like have coffees with people, have drinks with people, ask people for meetings. Usually people are really happy to pass on, their advice, thoughts. If you find somebody, I mean, you're doing an incredible job because you've got the kind of, you're talking to all these amazing people on your podcast and around the and beyond. But just if you see somebody that you find inspiring, reach out, ask them about their story. People will often be really, really happy to share it with you. And don't be too, based on my experience personally, I would always just say, don't get too anxious about not having the goal locked in. Some people who I knew who had a goal locked in, had it locked in, achieved it, and got to their mid-40s. And it just wasn't, have worked all their lives to get somewhere. And it's just not actually, by the time they got there, exactly what they wanted it to be. And I think that is very, very challenging later in life. So just allow yourself a bit of time, I would say, just to explore.
That's really important and interesting. Thank you for sharing that. And you mentioned the people who get really far along in their career and realize that's not that's a hill that they didn't even want to climb,
Yeah.
and they get to the top.
Yeah.
What advice and practices do you use, or would you advise someone to use to constantly be checking in with yourself to make sure that you're satisfied and you're happy with where you are, so you avoid kind of making your way all the way up a hill that you don't want to be on?
Yeah.
How do you keep yourself accountable that not only are you meeting your goals, but you're aligned with your values, your interests, and the life that you want to live as well?
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, do you know what? I imagine that there's tons of stuff out there that like allows you to kind of analyze that and break it down. My single, I don't know, you know, for what it's worth, my single thing that I would always recommend for people when they're trying to figure out whether or not this is something that they want to be doing is imagine if you go to a party and you meet somebody that you don't know and they ask you what you do. If when you tell them the answer to that question, you're exciting them. Like it doesn't matter for them, that might be the most boring job. Like they wouldn't want the job you do. But if you are excited about it and you can hear yourself and you could be like, well, actually, I do this and it's really great because of this, and you can hear yourself telling that, then you're in the right place. And frankly, a lot of the other stuff doesn't really, matter. But if the answer to that question you feel shoulders slump and you're a bit like, oh, I've had people say to me, oh, don't even ask, it's too boring. And I'm like, wow, okay, so that's you that is not, that may be like the way that you don't mind, and there's good reason for it, right? People do really boring jobs because they get paid a lot of money, and that's okay. That's okay. But I think if you're talking about values alignment and whether or not you're feeling, I think when you're feeling like you're in the right place, you're energized and you're excited.
I think that's such a valuable thought experiment. What would you say to the people who feel shame? Because I think certain jobs sound better. Like if you go to this party, there's certain things that sound cooler than other things. They
Yeah.
might be because of prestige, they might be because
Yeah.
of novelty. And I think that's one of the reasons why certain careers, certain degrees, certain paths are pushed on young people than
Mm.
others, because some are given more kind of respect than others in society. So what would you say to someone who's really excited about what they do on personally, privately, but they have a little bit of shame about announcing that to everyone because of how it might be perceived.
Right. Okay. Give me an example.
I think there's a new wave of people that are do like social media or
Okay.
influencing, or someone who works in an industry where you might not get paid a lot, like
Yeah.
non-for-profit,
Yeah.
or um I don't know, someone who's doing something creative that isn't like that's
Yeah.
not very mathsy or STEMmy. I study geography, and
Yeah.
when I go to a party and someone asks me, what do you study? And I say geography, I know someone is going to make a joke about coloring in.
Yeah. But
But I
Mike,
love it.
when I listen, and I know this is off kind of off podcast, but you telling me about geography was the first time that I have ever thought to myself, wow, that sounds incredibly exciting, because you're so passionate about it as a subject. You really are. It was that, I'm not joking. In my whole life, I've never heard somebody talk about geography the way that you talked to me about geography when we met. So, I think there's something to say there. Like, if you exude whatever it is you do, if you own it and really, if you're excited about it personally, then pass that on, right? Like, pass the love. That is what people look for. And you can be doing the coolest job in the world, but if you talk about it like you're not passionate about it, people will not think it's the coolest job in the world. Like, no way. And all those value judgments that go with various different things, I mean, she's a very personal example. My husband's an artist, like he's a working artist and always has been. He's never done anything else. And now we get to our kind of, mid 40s. um, if we're at a party and he tells somebody that, everybody's like, wow. So what might, years ago have been like, oh, uh-oh, because artists traditionally don't get paid very much money, but it's, he's an artist running his own business, and has made a career out of that. And that, yeah, now we're, where we are. People are really excited about that, really want to hear him talk about it, really want to, get into like, all right, so what exactly is it, that you're doing? So I think those value judgments shift and change over time. And I think you can't spend too much time. I know it's easier said than done, but just try not to spend too much time worrying about that. If you're excited about something, you can make anything, you can be passionate about anything. I think the same goes with the work ethic. I think you can work really hard and make a success of anything if you want to. If you want to put your mind to it.
100%. Okay, amazing. So we've touched on the person who doesn't know what they want to do and is scared. We've touched on the person who does know what they want to do but is ashamed. What would you say to the person who is listening that is doing something that they know doesn't satisfy them because they've done this mental experiment of would I be happy at a party telling people what I do?
Hmm.
And they want to transition into a different sector, into a different role. As someone who's transitioned through multiple sectors and roles,
Yeah.
what advice would you give them to navigate that transition?
Mm. I think there's a, I think there's quite a good, it's worth spending the time, I think, if you are in a job where you really know it's not for you. It is really a worthwhile exercise to really look at what are the elements of this job that I don't like. It's not the whole job usually, right? There's elements of it that I really don't like, and I don't want to find myself in that position again. But there's probably other things, if you sit down and really think about it, there's probably are other things that you do value and that you do like. So maybe the job is really boring, but the team's really great. And maybe you definitely want to look for something where the team is great, that you really get on with the people that you work with. We've got this whole landscape now, which we didn't grapple with when we were coming out of university, which is remote working versus in office working, things like that. Some people really respond well to, working on their own and being self-motivated, and others really don't. And I don't think I would have done necessarily at 21. So I think just try and, big teams, small teams, purpose-driven organizations, money, is money really important to you? And if it is, that's fine, right? And you need that's okay. So set your sights on those, you need to, that's a kind of on your values list, that's high up, that's fine. is it purpose-driven organizations, profit, non-profit, all of those things. I think it's worth just sitting down and really combing through, if you're in a job where you don't really want to be there, what are these things, the threads that really do, that you really want to hang on to. And then don't be too set on a sector, I think, because those threads can be found probably wherever you look. Right. So it's just taking a little bit of a macro look at kind of where you are, rather than zooming in saying, well, I no longer want to work in this sector. I'm going to leave and do something completely different. Hopefully that's helpful.
No, that makes a lot of sense. It's kind of like finding the ingredients about what your job
Yeah,
in
that's a
your
good
job that
phrase.
gives you joy,
Yeah.
and then not being too set on like what recipe you're going to make and just
Yeah.
know that
That's a much better way of putting it, in fact.
no, I love
We'll
the
go with that.
advice.
We're going to edit out my bit and put that in instead. That would be
No,
much better.
I'm not editing your all of your stuff out because I think you're brilliant. I think you really are. And because we've touched on all these career points, I think it's also, I really want to ask you about your role in your personal life as a mom as well, because you work with
Yeah.
inspiring girls, having your own children, like how has that been? What have you been careful in instilling so that they have empowering narratives
Mm.
about themselves growing up?
Mm. Well, I mean, it's a very live issue for me. I've got an 11-year-old girl, a 9-year-old boy, and a 3-year-old little girl as well. So the 11-year-old is just going into the age bracket of the girls that we work with, and it is a very interesting and sometimes quite challenging space to be in. Whereas I'm sort of both working with and parenting sort of young girls that are going through this process. And I think it's incredibly useful actually to inform the work that we do. Certainly leading an organization that is girl centered, but also being the CEO means that I'm a little bit detached from sometimes I'm a bit detached from the actual activities on the ground, particularly on an international level. So it kind of keeps me, very much feet to the fire in terms of what we're doing. I thought, I mean, when Molly, who's my 11-year-old, was about 3 or 4, I thought I'd really messed up. I mean, Molly was wearing Disney princess dresses, favorite color pink, played with like dolls, Barbie dolls, and much to my, I was like, putting everything in front of her. I was like, but what about this tractor? And no, there was absolutely not a chance. And I was tearing my hair out thinking, oh my God, I've completely ruined it. It's like all of my feminist activism, my whole life in my own house. But it just shows you really can't get, you really can't get too hung up on these things, because actually what we've tried to do with all of the kids is just make them understand. I think really, actually, I think I really, I'm a huge advocate for equality at home as well as in the workplace. So I spend a lot of my time talking about equality in the workplace, equality in society more generally. But I do think a lot of it, and I think the narrative is definitely there now in the public with Pregnant Then Screwed and lots of other advocacy groups about equality at home being such an important thing. I don't know if, you must have seen the campaign by, I think it's called Dad Shift, the campaign group, where they took statues of
Oh,
men
yeah.
and strapped babies or in baby carriers to them. So simple. And took pictures of them, and it was a couple of weeks ago. And there's all these campaigns going on, but I think all of it speaks to the same thing, where until we have equality at home, it's going to be very difficult to have equality in society more generally. So we have kind of role modeled that, I suppose, between myself and my husband, and we've always both worked. The kids see that we work the same amount. My husband's as involved in their lives as I am, and I think that really sets a precedent for what they then go on to understand in their realities. So, my son, I'm quite proud. I'm quietly proud of this. But whenever anybody asks my son what I do for a living, he says, "Mummy's the boss," and I kind of, I don't correct him. I don't correct him. I'm
I
like, okay.
love that.
So yeah, I don't correct him. And you know, Molly, I think has just got a very I mean, they're very used to, I mean, that she's grown up in an environment where she's got inspiring girls like notebook, inspiring girls tote bag, inspiring girl, you know what I mean? Like she's got an inspiring girls t-shirt. She knows, she's got the message. Um, but I think even then you have to be really, you still have to be quite conscious about even me. I think we all do. We're so, that bias is so built in sometimes that we do have to, you have to be very conscious about addressing it, making sure that they do understand that, you know, there, you know, women can, there are women doing all sorts of jobs. My son's very into um, go-karting, for example. So I really majored on the fact, I came back from an event the other day where we'd interviewed this incredible young woman who's actually Australian, but she's based in the UK, called Caitlin Wood. And she's a racing car driver, professional racing driver.
Wow.
And she's amazing, this young woman. And so I came back and I gave him apps. I talked to him about her for so long. Because I mean, that, for example, you just take that as an industry, you know, him being really into that. The streamers are all male, his, you know, the people around you are all male. It's dads that take their boys to the race car track. You know, it's really, that's a really male dominated space. So it's so important to like be sort of almost puncture that with these role models, these kind of rare, actually kind of rare diamonds in industries like that, where, you know, you really sort of have to make them understand that no, there are women doing this too. You just might not be able to see them because they're so, you know.
100%. I love that. And that is really interesting insight. And now we've talked about parenting with mindfulness of how you speak to young people around themselves. And in our kind of media discourse, there's now a lot of talk about inner child work and how we should kind of go back and make sure that we are being kind to like the inner child in ourselves. And
Mm.
I think that's something that's quite new, but it's really important and making sure that you speak to yourself in a nice way because you're not just talking to the version of you that you are now, but a younger version of yourself.
Yeah.
So can you please tell us about the This Little Girl Is Me campaign and your take on inner child work?
Sure. Yeah. So basically, we back in 2021, um, we actually, Miriam actually first had this kind of this idea that we do a This Little Girl Is Me campaign for the International Day of the Girl. So UN International Day of the Girl is held every year on the 11th of October, and we usually would celebrate it in some way. But this was a year after a certain presidential candidate, Kamala Harris. I don't know if you remember, but when she was running, she put out a post with a picture of herself as a little girl, and it was actually and saying that little girl was me. And it was about being bused from across state lines for to go to school. So it was actually a really, you know, it's a really poignant sort of story about racial inequalities, and you know, and it absolutely exploded at the time. It was absolutely huge. And it was about a year later, and we thought, you know, that was so powerful, and it was such an amazing kind of hook for her to tell a story about herself, which is personal, but also speaks to a much bigger message. I thought it's also actually a really easy, and in terms of our, you know, our principle about being accessible to all women everywhere to get involved in the organization, it's a really kind of easy ask for people. Just post a picture of yourself as a little girl and just pass on your reflections from that age. You know, what were you thinking about? What were your ambitions? Does that correlate to where you are now? What advice would you give to that little girl if you could speak to her now? So I suppose it is, you know, if you term it kind of inner child work, I suppose that is what it is. But it's and we launched it, and we've had the most incredible, in the years since we've done it. We were not planning on doing it as an annual campaign, but the first year we did it, you know, we had Melinda French Gates participate, we had Annie Lennox participating, we had, you know, Diana Ross. It's incredible. Millions of people saw it. Entirely organic, the campaign. And we couldn't sort of just leave it alone because it was just so popular. And we had people talking to us about that campaign for months saying, when are you going to run it again? That was so brilliant. I really want to get all my colleagues, my friends, my networks involved. So we're now running that on an annual basis. And we're running it again from the 8th to the 11th of October this year. So just 4 days. So you've got 4 days, everyone who's listening, to get involved. And it's just simply that. It's simply posting a picture of yourself as a young girl. We've got a whole toolkit on the website. If you would like to get involved, just go on the website, say, I think it's in how to get involved. And there's some guidance on what you just need to do, hashtags, etc., that you need to use. And we'd love, and the bigger the better, basically. And we know that, girls girls feel more positive about themselves after following amazing women on social media. So it's that storytelling piece. So we do this day in, day out, all over the world. We're sending women into schools. This is an opportunity to do a kind of a similar exercise, but it's on social media. So you've got the opportunity to reach a much, much wider audience and tell that story. And then we pick up and use those stories and we repurpose them to take them into schools. Because of course, we run it on LinkedIn and Instagram. A percentage of the girls are on Instagram, but not necessarily on LinkedIn. Of course, not yet. But the storytelling aspect of it and the awareness raising for the campaign is incredible.
That's awesome. And I've been doing this thing where on some of the episodes I've been giving the audience homework. Your homework is to do the This Little Girl Is Me campaign and tag Inspiring Girls. And I will leave all the resources in the show notes of this episode so people can reach out and get involved. But where else can they find you? Like, tell us about all the Inspiring Girl resources. I'll link them down below, but what should people get involved with as well as the campaign?
Sure. So, I mean, if you're listening to this in the UK, you can obviously volunteer for the UK campaign. We've got a sign up form on the UK website, or indeed, if you're based elsewhere, if we've got an Inspiring Girls chapter there, you can sign up and similarly and do that. We are doing I should say we're running the This Little Girl Is Me campaign from the 8th to the 11th, but we're immediately going straight into a campaign called The Big Give, which is a fundraising campaign. And we've been lucky enough to be chosen as a charity for match funding. So every pound that gets given in the week after, between the 10th and the 17th, gets doubled. And we're asking people, if you really would love to support the work that we do, if you can give £11 on the 11th of October in honour of International Day of the Girl, that would mean a huge amount to us, because we do, like all charities, we can only do the work we do when we have the resources to be able to do it. So if you want to support the work, please do volunteer with us. We'd love to have you as part of the family. And if you can post for the This Little Girl Is Me campaign and/or give us £11 on the 11th of October, we'd be really grateful.
Awesome. Well, I'm sure everyone's going to get involved. And before we wrap up, I always like to finish on the theme of gratitude. So, can you please tell us about what you're most grateful for today?
I am most grateful for, well, I probably should say it is my wedding anniversary today. So I'm probably most grateful for my husband,
Oh,
who is, and I suppose it all circles back to that equality at home piece I talked about earlier, who is a complete ally in parenting, life, career, and everything else. And I think, like I say, I think that equality at home piece is so, so important, has enabled me to do so much, including having 3 children. So he's what I'm grateful for today.
that's beautiful. Happy anniversary. And
Thank
thank
you.
you so much for sharing your insights and advice. You truly are an empowering and inspiring woman.
Oh, thank you, Mahika. And so are you. Let me throw that back at you as well, because
Oh,
it's been an absolute pleasure and you are a force to be reckoned with.
thank you. Thank you for listening to this episode of the Empower Sounds podcast. I hope that you enjoyed it. Let me know what you think, and please participate in the This Little Girl Is Me campaign. I will leave all the information down below on how you can get involved. and we'll speak soon. See you next week.